Hey everyone, welcome to our latest masterclass. My name's Dave Wilkins, founder of SDR Leaders of EMEA. We wanted to do a session which we'll talk about in a moment, but first off, if you've not yet got your tickets for the SDR Leaders of EMEA first ever conference in London, Funnel EMEA, you're missing out. It's going to be in 102 days, just before half term for everyone. So if you go to funnelemea.com, you'll find all the information about that. We've got a chief of vibes officer whose job is make it entertaining but very Eurocentric as well. And we've got some fantastic speakers over those 2 days. Going to have about 200 SDR leaders there. So with that being said, we have Martin here today who's going to be doing a really interesting topic around balancing empathy and authority. The leadership transition framework for new SDR managers. This is something that's really important as people are moving in from individual contributor to that leadership role. But then also for you as maybe second line leaders that are bringing on talent that's coming up, it's also a great framework for you to be using as well for your team. So with that being said, Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen and we'll get straight into it. So give me a moment. Let me get into it. Firstly, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be hosting this webinar today. And yeah, I want to thank everyone individually who's taken their time to join me. I know it's a very busy time with quarter just ending. This is a conversation I have a lot with the individuals I coach, and it's a very important topic and one that I'm very passionate about. I've tried to balance theory with actionable takeaways throughout the presentation. I want you guys to leave the webinar with ideas and concepts you can apply to your context. And yeah, if you pick up a few things that help and make a positive difference to how you feel in your role, that would be amazing and would make me very happy. This is an interactive session, so please interject at any time with questions, comments, and viewpoints. That is welcomed and encouraged. I might not be able to see the chat with the technical difficulties we're facing, but Dave mentioned he'll read that out. So yeah, feel free to add that at any time. So there's some familiar faces in attendance, which is amazing to see. But for the majority of you, this will be the first time meeting me. So before I start preaching, I'd like to give a bit of a background on myself. I've been in sales development around 6 years now, the majority of that in a leadership capacity. I've been fortunate to progress relatively quickly up the leadership path. So from player coach up to second line leadership and director level. This has been across startups, scale-ups and enterprise tech companies. Again, I'm very grateful for this as those stages of companies all bring different contexts, challenges and growth opportunities, which was massive for my personal development. I left my most recent SDR leadership role around 10 months or so ago now. This was to go out on my own. I now run my own SDR leadership coaching and consultancy business called Accelerate. If I had to summarize our mission as concisely as possible, it's to provide dedicated coaching and support to current and future first line SDR leaders. You guys probably know better than anyone, the SDRs themselves, they usually get a lot of support. SDR leaders, especially first line leaders, often do not. So we're here to give them the support and coaching that they deserve and they need in order to thrive and empower themselves and therefore their teams. Outside of work, I'm a big animal welfare advocate. I'll leave it there, otherwise I'll definitely start preaching and you guys don't want that. And as Ollie knows, I'm also a massive Arsenal fan. Yeah, family tradition, something I have no say in. Family from Stoke Newington and Islington, which is very much North Arsenal territory of North London, should I say. So yeah, maybe I'll skip over that because I'm trying to remain humble and gracious, even though we're champions. So let's move on. Before we get into today's agenda, I wanted to provide a little bit more context on what we do at Accelerate. Shameless plug, I know, forgive me, but in fairness, it's relevant to this topic and this conversation. So there are two coaching programs we run. One of these is the BDR to Leader Accelerator. The clue's in the name here. This is for the SDRs and the BDRs who want to progress into a leadership role internally. Equally, it's for the companies who want to promote internally for SDR leadership. So from SDR or senior SDR into team lead or manager roles. Depending on their context, the program is also fit for the team lead who's about to step into a manager role. Um, as we all probably know, these promotions usually happen because the individual in question is good at the role and the team is growing. They're then thrown into a leadership position with not a lot of guidance and asked to figure it out on the job. This is very challenging, obviously, and it has various implications on that individual, and also the team's performance. Um, Not anyone's fault necessarily. Senior leadership who promote these individuals often don't have the time or bandwidth to get them ready for that step up. So we come in and bridge that gap, and we run a program that gets that BDR in a position where they can step into a role, leading people, feeling empowered and ready to start driving results for their SDR function. We also run accelerate coaching programs. So this is support specifically for first line leaders, so SDR team leads and SDR managers. We all know the challenges of being a first line leader. And again, oftentimes these individuals get the least coaching, upskilling, and support. Not anyone's fault necessarily. Their bosses usually don't have the time or bandwidth to provide this. So we help bridge that gap. We offer those bespoke coaching programs based around personal and wider business needs. Enough of that for now, but I feel that's important context to add. Let's get into the agenda for this important session today. So I would like to start by breaking down when new SDR managers often struggle. We'll also define what I mean by new, as it's not as black and white as it may seem. I then want to speak about what I went through as a first-time SDR leader, the challenges I faced and the mistakes I made. We'll then introduce the empathy and authority framework. Like I said earlier, I want you guys to leave with some actionable takeaways. So we'll zoom into both the empathy and authority ends of the spectrum, running through some practical examples you can trial and apply to your context. I'll then summarize the framework and give some final thoughts on how to interpret it and use it now and in the future. Then if there's any questions you guys didn't get a chance to ask throughout, we'll pause for a moment and open up the floor. So let's do it. Before we jump into this topic, I want to clearly define what I mean by new. The obvious definition is an SDR who's very recently stepped into their first leadership position, whether that's a team lead or a manager role. I also define new as an SDR manager at an early stage of their leadership journey. For me, a year or even 18 months into your first manager position is still considered new, in my opinion. Then lastly, you're a BDR SDR manager who recently joined a new company. You're starting again in a new context, therefore you're new. Without proper guidance, I would say, and support to navigate these difficult contexts, SDR managers usually fall into either the too nice or the act like a manager trap. So to introduce the too nice trap, some classic examples could be avoiding difficult conversations and letting things slide you shouldn't have. Not feeling empowered to give honest feedback because you want to be liked and you don't want to upset anyone. Saying yes to everything and getting walked all over. Being afraid to challenge and therefore lowering your standards and almost accepting and encouraging mediocrity, etc., etc. You get the idea. On the other side of things, some classic examples of the act like a manager trap could be, pretending to have all the answers, even though you definitely don't. Changing your personality quite drastically and all of a sudden becoming overly serious and acting, how you think a manager should. Defaulting to numbers and metrics because you have no idea, how to connect with and lead with human beings. So you just default to the numbers. Things like feeling like you have to solve every single thing because you don't want to lose all credibility or this perceived authority you think you've established. Again, you get the picture there. So I've used, I would say, quite strong words throughout those explanations and examples. I think it's important to note there's no blame being placed on the new SDR managers who fall into either of these traps. Depending on your personality or your disposition, these are very logical human reactions to being put into an unknown and very challenging context. Being in these situations is very tough. I've been through it. You're figuring it out. You're doing the best you can. this is often with very little support or guidance. So even, without a reference point of what good looks like, what do you expect to happen? Um, it goes without saying, but being stuck in either of these traps for too long can have some pretty negative consequences for yourself and for your teams in the long run. Um, Often on the too nice side of things, it'll be very difficult to command that respect or authority, which means it's hard to affect change. Standards will drop and performance will be more difficult to manage. Again, on the act like a manager end, respect can be hard to come by. The individuals and human beings in your team won't necessarily feel safe or psychologically secure. This can lead to ramifications such as, people leaving at the first opportunity, and of course, impacting performance in the long run. So again, these are the extremes, right? And I'm intentionally using these strong words, I'll be honest about that. But I wanted to exemplify how important this topic is, and the effect it has on you as an SDR leader, but arguably more importantly, the effect it has on the human beings on your team that you have the responsibility to lead. So, guess what happened to me? I was fortunate enough to progress into a leadership role very early in my SDR career. I had just turned 23 at the time. Obviously, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Um, my boss, who was incredible and the best boss I could have ever wished for, she was also extremely busy. So she didn't really have the time to kind of guide me through that peer to boss transition. Um, so for this reason, I had to kind of figure it out myself and do the best that I could. For me, what that looked like is I fell straight into the too nice trap. I did all the things we covered on that last slide, basically word for word. This was okay for a while. We were in a period of hyper growth. Performance was great. Happy days. Everyone's happy. I thought, this management gig is easy. Um, that's obviously unsustainable, and there'll be an inevitable downturn in performance at some stage. And ultimately, that came. So over time, this led to me having to let someone go. Um, it was the first time I'd ever done this. So it was a big moment for me in my early leadership career. To cut a long story short, I managed the process very poorly from start to finish on reflection. I sugarcoated feedback. Um, I was scared to be honest. I was nowhere near clear enough on the severity of the situation this individual was in. Um, Ultimately, this individual was very surprised and shocked when they were let go. From that point, as you can imagine, it got very messy and it was a very difficult situation, which, I'll spare you the details of for now. This was very tough for me personally. However, way, 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 way more importantly than that, it was very tough for the individual who was let go. Um, I'm a massive believer that as people leaders, we have a huge responsibility to protect the well-being and the psychological safety of the individuals we manage. Um, in this case, I didn't meet that responsibility. In fact, I fell way short, and I let that particular individual down. This was a big turning point for me, and it was really the catalyst to kind of drop the ego, self-reflect, and start developing and upskilling myself with the required skills. So this never happened again. Um, I'd encourage people in this context to be proactive on this. Unlike me, I kind of let it come to a head, excuse me. And it was tough and it was uncomfortable. So I wanted to share kind of what I went through to kind of level set on what's coming next. So good news now, on a more positive note, you absolutely can avoid both the too nice and the act like a manager traps as a new SDR leader. Learning and understanding how to use this framework, the empathy and authority framework, is a great way to do this. Let me introduce the framework on a high level. We'll then zoom into either side of it, going through each point you see there on the spectrum with practical examples in the next couple of slides. When I first started speaking about these themes and coaching SDR managers, I'd reference these ideas quite a lot, but it was quite abstract and intangible. So I wanted to take the time to create a simple visual representation with practical and actionable guidance within it. So for me, if you want to excel as a new SDR leader, you need to be comfortable and competent operating at either end of the spectrum. You need to have both approaches in your toolkit. That's step one. You then need to understand which contexts require you to move up and down the spectrum. Um, as we know, you're faced with a lot of different contexts and challenges as an SDR manager. Some of these situations require a more empathetic approach. Others demand a more authoritative approach. When you combine these 2 points, you avoid those traps we just spoke about, and then you start leading with empathy and authority in a way that feels natural and human, that your team responds to, as opposed to in a way that's forced and disingenuous, which your team, of course, does not. That's a very big and important difference. Um, like I said, there's practical ways you can apply this to your own context. So let me get into that. I can see the chat flicking up. I'm not sure if there's any questions yet, Dave, or are you good to carry on?
Carry on.
Okay. I'm scared to click on anything in case it will just fall apart.
It's mostly all
Um,
anti-Arsenal, so don't worry about it.
oh God, I don't want to see it then. I'll move on. Um, okay, leading with empathy, practical examples. So let's take a moment to zoom in to this side of the spectrum. You hear about, well, at least I do, about leading with empathy a lot. But I feel there's a lack of guidance on how you actually do this and what actions you can take, especially in the context of an SDR manager. Um, each of these subheadings are a hour long, if not more, topic in themselves. So I'm going to do my best to keep them high level. A lot of the points are relatively simple. That's because they are, they're very often overlooked, however. Um, so let's break down the first point, be open, honest, and vulnerable. There's some actions you can take here. So firstly, acknowledge that you're learning. Don't pretend to have it all figured out. Share and be honest about making mistakes. Again, own this. Don't try and hide it or sweep it under the rug. Ask for feedback and lean on your more tenured reps' expertise. The overriding point within this box and subheading is, be human. Your reps are smart. They see through it if you're trying to bullshit them. Be human, be honest, be vulnerable. As with all of these points, especially on the empathy side of the spectrum, there's a balance that you need to strike. There's a difference between being open and honest and perhaps oversharing. Some new managers can make this mistake and it can dilute authority a little bit. So, for example, there's a difference between, this is new to both of us, let's figure this out together, as opposed to, I'm overwhelmed, I have no idea what I'm doing, someone please help me. Again, extreme examples, but the point I'm making is you still need to portray a level of confidence and conviction in what you're doing. And you demonstrate this by being honest about the situation, not unsure about yourself, if that makes sense. Finally, on the vulnerability piece, being vulnerable in the right context shows courage and it helps you build connection with your team on a human level. Doing it in the wrong manner, however, can be perceived potentially as looking for sympathy, which of course you want to avoid. So again, phrasing like, I made the same mistake hundreds of times when I was an SDR, this is how I fixed it, as opposed to, yeah, I'm really struggling here, I need you to help me out. Next point, portray genuine care, kindness, and support. So this is very much linked to point 1 as well as point 3, and it's the little arrows connecting them. How do you do this? So firstly, really invest the time to understand each human being. You have the privilege and the responsibility of leading. What motivates them? What are their interests outside of work? What's their why? What can you do and influence to get them to where they need to be? Go out of your way to champion them internally, whether that's for a promotion, for extra responsibility, whatever the case may be. Go above and beyond here. Acknowledge and celebrate hard work. Yeah, again, seems very simple, but this one is massively overlooked by a lot of managers. We've probably all experienced this ourselves, perhaps as individual contributors or even as first-time managers. Don't just celebrate the end result. Really acknowledge and appreciate the effort your team are putting in day to day. This has a huge impact on motivation. Follow through on 100% of the commitments to the team to build that trust and safety. All of these points, they tie into this third box here, establish relationships and psychological safety. Um, a point I want to pick out here is be honest about your influence. The goal is to build trust. So you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Be honest about what you can control and influence within the business, for that rep and for your team as a whole. The final point on this slide is introduce intentions in your team meetings. Um, this might sound a little bit abstract, so let me explain what this means. I do have actually some former team members on the call, and also some people I've coached, so they'll know what I mean. But to those who don't, this might sound a little bit abstract. So yeah, let me provide some context. So this is something I introduce as part of my team meetings. Everyone obviously has a different meeting cadence and context. I'm a big advocate of having an hour-long team coaching session towards the end of the week, ideally in person if you can, which is separate to a Monday kickoff call or Friday wrap-up call. Intentions, quote unquote, were a section of this meeting, usually taking between 10, 15, 20 minutes. What the hell do I mean? In short, this is an exercise. You go around the room and you ask each SDR, each member of your team, what their intention for the week is. This is similar to a commitment, but it doesn't have to be work related. It's important to emphasize that when you're leading the meeting. It usually manifests or comes out as a combination of both. So an example of an intention an SDR might give is, this week I need to prioritize, going to the gym more. I also need to hold myself accountable on my cold calling numbers. This is very powerful as it creates a deep trust and bond within the group. It's an opportunity for the team to be honest and vulnerable collectively. It's really important as an SDR leader that you're including yourself here. You need to lead by example and demonstrate that honesty and vulnerability with your intention for the week. Remember, it's a two-way street. In the same team meeting, in the following week, take 10 minutes to go around the room and discuss the previous week's intention. Again, this is the perfect way to start instilling accountability within your team culture. This may seem trivial, but when it comes to creating a team spirit and really cultivating empathy throughout the team, this has been transformational for me and also some individuals who I've had the pleasure of working with. So yeah, a bit of a real life point I wanted to make there. Okay, the other end of the spectrum, the authority end. When it comes to the authority end of the spectrum, the word natural is very important. That's a word that I say probably too much throughout the day, but in this context, it's extremely important to note. The subheadings and actions you see on this slide give you the opportunity to establish authority in a way that is natural. The actions you saw earlier under the act like a manager trap, I would say these are an attempt to establish authority in a way that is unnatural, forced, and disingenuous, perhaps. I hope you guys can clearly see the difference there. So let's break some of this down. Lead by example. Again, very simple, but often overlooked. Don't forget the basics, whether that's turning up a bit earlier, finishing a bit later. Demonstrate to the team through your actions that you're committed to leading a high-performing team. Live these high standards. How can you demand this from your team if you're not doing it yourself? Stay calm and consistent and embrace change. Working in tech and SaaS can be crazy and unpredictable. We've all been through this. Some of you probably going through this now. It's your responsibility as a new SDR leader not to contribute to this feeling of chaos and uncertainty, but instead you need to demonstrate a level of calmness and security that helps put your team at ease, essentially. This is linked very much to the second point, protect your team. Again, this is your responsibility, I believe, as a leader of people. Aspects of this include shield your team from above pressures, take full responsibility of the team's performance, advocate internally with strength. All of these actions compounded over time starts building and establishing that authority, both in your team and also in the wider business. Um, a great example, or a real life context, is put a marker down early. So to relate this to real life, this could potentially be a dispute between an SDR in your team and their AE, perhaps. This happens a lot. Some of you probably had to deal with this today. This is the perfect scenario to take action to establish authority in a way that is natural. Um, general guidance, be strong and empowered in these situations. Fight for your SDR, back them, champion them, show you don't have that inferiority complex, and show you're not afraid to challenge. Um, Again, there's a balance here. We don't want to be overzealous or too aggressive, excuse me. But equally, you want to take the opportunity to put a marker down in the right manner. Make decisions with conviction. Another great and very natural way to build and demonstrate a level of authority. There are scenarios that come up weekly, if not daily, as a new SDR manager, where you have to make a decision. How often these scenarios come up, may depend on your rules of engagement and how clear they are. I know that's a work in progress for everyone, but let's use that as an example. So, say you have two SDRs in your team who have a dispute over, let's say, who owns an account or who claims a meeting, whatever the case may be. It's your responsibility as a leader to make a call. Don't sit on the fence. Don't leave any room for ambiguity or interpretation. Make a decision with 100% transparency in a fair and consistent manner. Equally as importantly, always hear people out. Remember, the framework is about being competent at both ends. In these contexts, you also need to exercise that empathetic approach we spoke about earlier. So just to round up those 3 points, as they're very much linked as well, the scenarios we've spoken about are almost guaranteed to come up as an SDR manager or even a team lead. This is what I mean by establishing authority in a way that is natural. You're not going out of your way to overcompensate and force authority. You're handling situations and scenarios in a manner that establishes authority. That's the difference, and that's the key learning there. Non-negotiables. I want to round off this slide by talking about one of my favorite topics, to be honest, something I spend a lot of time talking about. This is really important and it's often overlooked. I think not only by new SDR leaders, but I would say even established SDR leaders. I understand why. I understand why you might potentially want to avoid this topic. Perhaps there's a fear that it could be perceived as too strong or overbearing. For me, done in the right manner, introducing and communicating non-negotiables is a perfect way to establish authority naturally. It's also a great way to demonstrate both authority and empathy in your leadership. This is a massive topic in itself, but I'm going to try and keep it high level. Your non-negotiables need to be communicated as shared agreements as opposed to rules. Everyone hates rules. I know, I certainly do. Rules are restrictive. This is the opposite of what you want to portray and achieve. So explain to the team that you're establishing these non-negotiables to help them and yourself become high performing. This helps create a collective team spirit. Keep them short, simple, and human. I'd recommend between 3 and 5 maximum. Make them clear and linked to behaviors and easy to live by. I would almost see this, especially for a new leader, a new SDR leader, this is an opportunity to define who you are as a leader and the values you want your team to have. And again, this will establish authority in the right way. So I've included examples of the non-negotiables I settled on in my time in SDR leadership. You can see them there at the bottom of the slide. So mine were honest, vulnerable, driven, committed, and hungry. This was very intentional. And to go back to that point, it's allowed me to balance both empathy and authority in my leadership. So, themes like honest and vulnerable, they're taken directly from the empathy end of the spectrum. Whereas themes like driven, committed, and hungry have more of perhaps a demanding and authoritative tone. And again, that's very intentional, and that's the balance that's important to strike. And again, taking the time to establish and communicate these non-negotiables, it gives you the perfect opportunity to do that. they're my examples. You know, feel free to use them as a guide or as inspiration. But like I said, the non-negotiables you choose need to be a reflection of the type of leader you want to be and the standards you want to set. You know, these are things you'll have to hold yourself accountable to and live every day. So it's something that's very personal. Um, to wrap up this point, after establishing and communicating, it's very important you reinforce through action and yeah, not necessarily repetition. So if you're talking about them more than you live them, you're almost defeating the object. You need to live them every single day, and you need to lead from the front. You also need to be very strong on upholding them throughout the team. Um, if they start to slip, then you start losing the value, and it almost becomes redundant. So, call them out positively and recognize them when you see them in action day to day. If there's any slip ups or deviation from the agreed non-negotiables, call this out um, calmly and consistently. Have a bit of fun with it. Be human around it. Be empathetic around it. But it's very important that that's almost corrected in real time. Um, if you do this long enough, they will become second nature, and that's the point you want to get to. Um, so that's almost the introduction of non-negotiables. Further down the line, make sure you review and evolve them. Keep your finger on the pulse. Your team will grow, people will get promoted, they'll leave, etc., etc. That context will likely shift. So be empowered to involve your new reps, your existing team in these conversations, and have that review. Unpack what's working, what isn't, perhaps add new ones as a group, and show that you're open to new ideas, and you value the insight and the input from your team on shaping that culture and that identity. Okay. Any questions before we move on to how to use the framework? Just checking the time. We're good for now.
No questions in the chat, but if there's anybody that wants to jump off mute, have a question, you have 5 seconds to come off mute. Keep going.
I think that's 5. Okay, so I want to kind of level set for a moment on how to use the framework. So we've covered a lot today, a lot of themes, a lot of topics, a lot of tangents. So I wanted to take this moment and this slide to almost gather our collective thoughts and summarize how to use the framework. So like I said earlier, step 1 is getting comfortable and competent operating at both ends of the spectrum. Take a moment to be humble, to reflect and be honest with yourself. Do you have the skill set to execute all of the points you see on the spectrum? Are you confident and empowered across all of these themes and topics? If you are, amazing. If you're not, these are areas to start looking at and to start developing yourself. The second step, like we mentioned earlier, is understanding which context requires which approach. To use a football analogy, the game state dictates which end of the spectrum you operate on. So some contexts require a more empathetic approach, whereas other contexts require a more authoritative approach. This is difficult to understand at times. And at least in my experience, it's something that comes more naturally as you grow in stature and confidence as a leader. Equally, you'll get this understanding through getting things wrong and learning, like we all do. And of course, getting the right guidance will help you get to that point quicker. So to intentionally oversimplify, if you combine these 2 points, you'll reach a stage where you're leading with both empathy and authority in a way that's natural and received well by the human beings that you're leading. I'm telling you now, having this ability is a game changer when it comes to your leadership journey. Some final points to round off. This isn't a destination. Getting to this point is a work in progress for everybody. I include myself in that. It's my job to coach people on this now. I'm still learning. I'm still developing myself. I think, again, as people leaders, it's our responsibility to be humble and open to improving so that we can serve the individuals that we're leading. Finally, having the humility and the self-awareness to even be aware of the importance of this topic and having empathy at your core as a leader, let alone working on it and developing yourself on it, puts you ahead of the majority of other quote unquote leaders that you'll come across. Yeah, I'm very strong on this. I think if you don't know how to lead with empathy, yeah, you're not a leader, you're a manager, and that's a huge difference, as we all know. So that's that. I've spoken a lot and it's 20 to 5 already, which is crazy. I know there were no questions live, but yeah, I'm going to take a breath and maybe even a sip of water. And if there's any questions from the floor, yeah, clarifications, viewpoints, additional points to what I raised, then yeah, please let me know.
Let's open it up to the group.
I suppose one question I would have is, say you have someone in the team who maybe is quite set in their ways, and you try to come in with a balanced approach, being empathetic and not trying to put too much authority on the situation. But even when showing them empathy, they continue to kind of refuse that soft approach. And then you find
Yeah,
if you move towards that more harder reaction in response, it then just creates even more conflict. I mean, in those situations, is it kind of too far gone, or is there maybe another way that isn't, kind of letting that person go from the team?
yeah, good question, mate. Yeah, I would say that's very contextual. If it is too far gone, those situations can obviously occur. Um, but I would say in those instances, you really need to understand that individual and then appeal to their self-interest, right? Ultimately, despite being maybe harder to manage and not responding to either of those approaches, this individual will have a goal in mind. So really stripping that back and directly understanding what that interest is, and then almost appealing to that interest in your coaching and your guidance and your communication, that can kind of help break them out of that cycle. Um, does it work all the time? No. Um, if it doesn't, then that raises the question, do they have the right attitude and application to perhaps be a part of the team, of course. But that's an approach I'll potentially try to kind of break through that barrier, if that makes sense. Nice one.
Great. There's a couple of questions come through here from Agata. There is a balance between empathy and human approach and keeping control. We are still in the workplace. Do you have any examples when you don't know what to do?
Yeah, every day. um, no, listen, there's always going to be context where you don't know what to do. Um, Maybe just going back to this point in the middle. Understanding which context to use, or sorry, which approach to use in which context, that comes over time and experience. You will get it wrong over time. I certainly have, and a lot of great, SDR leaders have. Um, but try and understand the game state and try and understand that individual. I speak a lot about building relationships with each individual in your team and really taking the time to establish that. That's another topic for another day, perhaps. But when you have that understanding and that relationship with the individual, it will guide you on kind of what approach to take and what approach they respond to. Of course, the context they're in also dictates that, but the individual's personality and their disposition also dictates that as well. So if you're unsure, really zoom into that individual and ask yourself, do I understand what makes them tick? Do I understand what they respond to? If the answer is yes, that will guide your approach. If the answer is no, then you need to do some work building and establishing that relationship. Um, but yeah, there'll still be contexts that come up where you don't know what to do, of course. But with practice, and like I say, as you grow in stature, you'll start to understand which game state and context requires which approach. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Agata, you've got your hand up. Do you have a follow-up question to that?
Well, yes, I do because first of all, hello everybody. I'm really sorry for being late. You know, kid stuff, but I was actually looking forward to this session because I'm currently formally stepping into a leadership SDR leadership position, and I've been actually doing that for a while now, but not officially. and I'm stupid because of that. But frankly speaking, I have always had a little problem with my natural empathy, because every time that someone, shares any stories with me about their personal life, the reasons for this and that, I take it really strong, and I have to limit that, and I have to, take control over that, to actually, maintain the company, work environment, corporate, space. So I was actually considering if there is, any, red line, because I believe that being motivated in the workplace, and that, for example, in sales, is absolutely crucial. You cannot be successful in sales if you're not motivated, if you don't have that energy, if you don't have, but you still need to have the process. You need to have the let's say the system that keeps you in line. So basically, it's, for me, it's really hard to, for example, listen to a mother, who is struggling, single mom who is struggling with a sick child, but she's not performing well. And then with, the structure that we have in the organization, and my heart tells me to do everything I can to help her, and then it ends up me working over hours at night. But then how do you struggle with it? Because that's my main problem, I have to say.
That's a great question. And firstly, thank you for sharing and being open about that as well. Yeah, it's a difficult one. And, that's, something I've probably struggled with in the past is naturally when you do lead with empathy and you're an empathetic person, you take on people's burdens and their struggles. And that can be tough and it can be draining. But equally, you need to have boundaries within your leadership as well. Um, the way I'd summarize it is, as a people leader, you're there to ensure the well-being and the psychological safety of the individual you're leading as much as you can, right? And that end part is important. There's only so much you can do. So controlling an environment that makes their time at work as enjoyable as possible and supporting them and championing them is key, right? But equally, there has to be a boundary there, and if you cross that boundary, it can almost skew how you might, lead others in the team. Maybe emphasize too much on this individual, like the example that you gave. So again, that comes with experience, right? Yeah, you understand that an individual needs a certain amount of support, but equally, you can't go too far and above and beyond. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's a boundary on building that connection with the individual. You can go as far as you want with that. Build that relationship, help them, support them, talk them through things. But equally, if it starts affecting how you're leading the other people, or you see yourself perhaps doing, overcompensating for that individual, that's when you might have to, yeah, kind of reflect and think, maybe I have crossed that boundary that you mentioned. That's a really good question, and I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thank you. John, let's take us on home. What's your question?
Oh, no pressure, Dave. Thanks. Yeah, no pressure.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, cheers. So, first of all, which will help anyone on this call, read the Qualified Sales Leader by John McManam, because that will answer that question around sort of empathy and things like that. He talks about being a individual contributor is like being single, and being a leader is like having children. You're suddenly responsible for other people and their success and their feelings and everything else. Really cool way of looking at it. But the question I wanted to ask Martin is, if you can think back this far, what is the one bit of advice you wish you'd had when you first became that leader, that you had to learn over time?
Great question, my friend. I mean, I'd love for someone to have given me the empathy and authority framework. Um, no, one piece of advice is just be human. Um, be human and understand that everyone is learning together and at the same time. I think when you're put into a leadership position with very little experience, it can be tough not to get into your own head, and maybe imposter syndrome comes in. Oh my god, they're older than me, they're more tenured than me, how are they going to respond to me? So again, I found myself defaulting to the too nice trap. But just understand that everyone's learning, we're all figuring it out, we're all trying. Just be human about it, be honest about it, and that's what other human beings respond to. I would have loved a bit of guidance on how to be a bit more authoritative, of course. That's something that came later for me down the line. But yeah, don't overcomplicate it. Trust yourself, be kind to yourself, and just realize that everyone's figuring it out as we go.
Great way to end it. Thank you, Martin, and thank you everyone ever so much for being part of this and being so involved in this. That was really interesting. So really appreciate you all for being here. We'll have this on our YouTube channel as well. You'll get the link after the game today. Martin, thank you ever so much yet again. And for all of you, thank you. Have a great rest of the day. It's coming home.
Thank you, guys.